Now, the White House says it doesn't anticipate taking any actions toward Iran at this time, including sanctions. But it did repeat the offer to open up channels of communication if Iran is interested. Biden's national security advisor said this may be the best chance of striking a deal.
One of our concerns right now is that Iran is presently threatening to move even further out of compliance, to refuse to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency in the work it's trying to do to ensure that nothing in Iran's program is being used for weapons purposes. So I think the first order of business here would be for the Iranians to take the decision to stop the process of moving further out of compliance. And then I do believe that there is a diplomatic pathway to getting to an ultimate agreement.
Fawaz Zozez is a professor of international relations at the London School of Economics and director of the Middle East Centre at the LSE. Thanks for speaking to us. Good to see you, sir. It's been a while, and I really do want to get your take on this. I mean, what do you make of those comments there? The Biden administration is certainly doing outreach here, but so much has moved on since the Trump administration pulled the plug on that deal. Where do Tehran and D.C. really begin?
Well, you're right. The world has changed a great deal. Yeah. And the world is delighted to have Joe Biden, in particular where I'm here in the heart of Europe. Even Boris Johnson, who was a very close friend of Donald Trump, is delighted to have Joe Biden. Certainty, America now speaks with one particular voice. America stresses multilateralism. You can really summarize Joe Biden's foreign policy vision by maximum diplomacy as opposed to maximum pressure. That was the policy of Donald Trump. You're talking about multilateral diplomacy of Joe Biden versus America's first. So there's a great deal of elation in the world, most of the world. Yet at the same time, the world is waiting to see the specifics. If you ask me about Joe Biden foreign policy, it's really big on basically the broad contours. But there is a little really about specificity, no details. I mean, think of Joe Biden's domestic politics, very highly ambitious. It's really Joe Biden is proactive on the offensive. He wants to transform the American economy. He wants to bridge divide inside America. Yet, in terms of foreign policy, he's not as ambitious. He's cautious. And that's why the world is waiting to see the specific policies, because, as they say, the devil lies in the details.
So where does Tehran look at this, though? They certainly feel like America pulled out of the deal, that they want America to make the first outreach here. They want sanctions lifted before anything is done from Tehran's point of view. How is some sort of compromise reached between Tehran and DC here?
Robin, there is a huge gulf between Iran on the one hand and the United States and its European allies on the other hand. For Iran, sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. The United States must lift the sanctions that were imposed by President Donald Trump in 2018. Lifting the sanctions is a prerequisite for Iran to return to its commitments under the 2015 nuclear deal. For President Biden and even for his European allies, Iran must respect its commitments while the sanctions remain in place. If you ask me really what the Biden administration wants and what Europe too, remember now, Joe Biden is trying to portray the conflict with Iran. It's not the United States versus Iran. It's the United States and Europe versus Iran. Not only they want Iran to return to the 2015 nuclear deal, but they want to overhaul the original deal. They want to expand and deepen the 2015 nuclear deal, and they want to include also other activities by Iran, including its ballistic missiles and its regional activities. So you have a long way to go.
And it's certainly a very optimistic thought if you think in the next week or so, despite these goodwill gestures, that Iran says that it'll stop IAEA inspections. I mean, is Iran playing with fire here, as the German foreign minister suggested?
And this is, again, to come back to Iran's strategy, Robin, as you've said. Time is not on Iran's side. The Iranian economy is bleeding, and what Iran has been trying to do in the past few months is to really raise the stakes, to increase the pressure, to speed up its enrichment of uranium, to say to the Atomic International Agency, you won't be able to really basically come to Iran and check on our nuclear activities. And all these moves are part of Iran's strategy to pressure the Biden administration to begin the process of lifting the sanctions. The Biden administration says, no way, because you might say, why? Why the Biden administration is not lifting the sanctions? Just to give you an idea, Robin, what we're talking about. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, the National Security Advisor, Jack Sullivan, the head of the CIA, William Burns, and other players were the ones who basically negotiated the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. So the Iranians are saying, look, guys, you were part of the deal, and why are you taking your time? So what we're seeing now is that both sides are positioning themselves, and I think there is a new opening. And the new opening is the European Union basically has called for a diplomatic meeting, a diplomatic forum, an unofficial meeting to begin the process of talking, both Iran and the United States and the European community and the great powers.
And what about Russia and China here? Because obviously they're signatories to that original deal as well. I mean, how much negotiation and how much pressure, or at least communication, needs to be done via China and Russia? And clearly, does the Biden administration need to reach out to them on that case as well?
You're absolutely correct. And the initiative by the European Union on Thursday was to include both Russia and China. Russia and China are not on the same page as the United States and Europe. Russia and China would like the United States to return to the 2015 nuclear deal. They do not really want to overhaul the nuclear deal. So yes, they will be involved, but the reality is it's going to take a long time because you have a huge, as I said, Robin, huge gulf between Iran and the United States. And a further complicating point, you have elections in Iran in 4 months. And the elections might produce a more conservative government than the Rouhani, the President Rouhani and the Foreign Minister Zarif. So time is really of a great essence here. And that's why it seems to me I don't see the Biden administration really in any kind of a hurry. And I think the strategy of the Biden administration is to keep the sanctions on and to really pressure Iran not only to return to the 2015 nuclear deal, but also to open up the deal and include other limits and basically on the Iranian nuclear deal and the ballistic missiles as well. I am not optimistic. If you ask me, what are the chances of a breakthrough between Iran on the one hand and the United States and its European allies, I would say between 30 and 35% at this moment.
Okay, well, let's talk again and see what happens in the next few weeks and months. Fawaz Zozez there from the London School of Economics. Always good to get your analysis. Thank you, sir.